Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Ian Tuttle of National Review, who is in for Jim Garrity today. I am Greg Corombos of Radio America. We don't have any good martinis today. Let's just be honest about that. But we do have a lot to say about last night's results. But breaking news this morning, Ian, Merrick Garland, the chief judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, is officially Barack Obama's choice to succeed Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court. He talked about his 19 years of jurisprudence, how he oversaw the Oklahoma City investigation. He was even a prosecutor in the Justice Department under Bush 41. Should the Senate Republicans give him a hearing?
No.
All right.
Next question. Lovely man, I'm sure. Apparently he is also a tutor for elementary school students, but it's never been about the nominee. It's always been about the principle at stake here. So here's to Chuck Grassley and Mitch McConnell holding the line. We'll see if they do. They should.
On to the results from Super Tuesday. Is this 2 or 3? I can't figure this out. Anyway, March 1st was
feels like years.
Well, the results were very clear last night, and we don't particularly like them from a conservative perspective. But again, they're unmistakable. On the Republican side, Donald Trump, the polls were pretty much dead on in Florida. He easily beats Marco Rubio, wins by 18, 19 points there. Even if all the Cruz voters had gone over to Marco Rubio, it still wouldn't have been enough. In North Carolina, Trump edges Ted Cruz. In Ohio, John Kasich does get the desperately needed win there to deny Trump the 66 delegates, but of course that means Kasich will stay in for a while in what is now a three-man race, but more on that in a moment. Trump does very, very well in Illinois. That was an interesting kind of winner-take-all situation. It wasn't winner-take-all like Florida or Ohio, but by congressional districts and some other factors, and Trump just absolutely dominated. And even in Missouri, where folks thought Cruz had a good chance of winning, it's very, very tight, and I don't even think it's been called yet, but Trump is ahead, and it looks like he's going to win. And even if he doesn't, he scored a major delegate haul over the course of the night, and he's ahead by well over 200 delegates now. On the Democratic side, after Bernie Sanders' big upset win in Michigan last week, some were thinking he might win 2 or even 3 states last night. He didn't win any. He got crushed in Florida, crushed in North Carolina, really crushed in Ohio by double digits, and beaten also in Illinois and Missouri, which were closer. And even if he had won a couple of those states, as the trend has gone, he would have been still decimated in the delegate count. So inevitability seems to be the word of the day, although it seems much more likely for Hillary at this point, since that looks like a runaway train. Republicans looking at a very uphill climb to stop Donald Trump.
All that sounds exactly right. Let's start with the Democrats, just because, like you said, there were whisperings out there that maybe Bernie's results in Michigan would be indicative of some of those other Midwest industrial states, but it obviously wasn't the case. Probably a number of reasons. One plausible explanation is that Democrats are seeing Trump on the other side. A lot of them are saying, if Trump is going to be the nominee on the Republican side, let's actually put someone in the White House or in the position of Democratic nominee who can whoop him, and that's going to be Hillary. There's simply no way around that, at least theoretically at this point. It seems so obvious that she's just going to crush him if he's the nominee. I think John Podhoretz at Commentary points out that Trump is 98% in the hole, or 98 points in the hole, compared to Hillary when it comes to Hispanics. And that's 11% of the electorate. There's no way you can win a general election on that. A lot of Democrats, I assume, are looking and saying, look, she's in a better position. She's been in this entire race because they're looking at the Republican side. Over to the Republican side, I guess we have to thank John Kasich, which makes me die a little inside. He did at least do one good thing, which was win Ohio. But like you said, now we have this problem of, as my colleague David French wrote on the corner at National Review, he might have won the battle and lost us the war, because he might end up losing states or splitting delegates going forward. So it's very difficult sort of to know what the Kasich factor is going to be going forward, other than that John Kasich will be working ruthlessly to promote John Kasich over the next several weeks. Other than that, I don't think the Cruz camp had any expectations that last night was going to be a particularly good night for them. They had hoped to pull away with one state fairly clearly, and even that doesn't look like is going to happen. Overall, a very grim night. It seems clearer than ever that Trump's momentum is going to be very, very hard to stop.
As we alluded to in setting up that first martini, it's now a three-man race on the Republican side: Trump, Cruz, Kasich. That's because as a result of Trump's decisive win in Florida, Marco Rubio, although he had said yesterday he would go on, decided that it's time to suspend the campaign. As he did so, he talked about why he ran and why it's important for the party leaders to pay attention to the conservative base, and how he tried to be a bridge between conservatives who want desperately needed change in Washington and those who know actually how to affect that change. Here's some of what he said in his speech in which he ended his campaign.
A political establishment that for far too long has looked down at conservatives as simple-minded people, looked down at conservatives as simply bomb throwers. A political establishment that for far too long has taken the votes of conservatives for granted. And a political establishment that has grown to confuse cronyism for capitalism and big business for free enterprise. I endeavored over the last 11 months to bridge this divide within our party and within our country, because I know that after 8 years of Barack Obama, this nation needs a vibrant and growing conservative movement, and it needs a strong Republican Party to change the direction now of this country, or many of the things that are going wrong in America will become permanent, and many of the things that make us a special country will be gone. America needs a vibrant conservative movement, but one that's built on principles and on ideas, not on fear, not on anger, not on preying on people's frustration.
So, Ian, a lot of analysis, of course, going on to what went wrong ultimately for Marco Rubio. Some say he never had the deepest of bases. If you ask me, I think it was probably ultimately he never could outrun Gang of Eight and the impact that had on the conservative attitude towards Marco Rubio. But he did run an aspirational campaign. He did appeal to some of the better ideals of America. And as he admitted in his speech, usually that works on a campaign. This year, the appetite just wasn't there for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it really is astonishing how far away the Republican electorate was from Marco Rubio. Looking back, it seemed like Rubio was going to be the voice of the Republican electorate this year. So I have a couple things. One is I think you're absolutely right about the Gang of Eight. It's just enormously difficult to think of another piece of legislation that was so phenomenally detrimental to a candidate or to a whole political movement. I mean, I think you could plausibly frame the whole 2016 Republican race in terms of Gang of Eight. You know, I don't think that that's necessarily Trump's major draw, despite what he sort of claimed and despite the way he got into the race. But there's no question that that's what people are fighting over. And you're absolutely right. Rubio was never able to outrun it. And it's amazing to me that the Republican electorate held it against him to the extent that they did. Maybe that's completely justifiable, but it was a phenomenal misjudgment on Rubio's part back in 2013, and just one that absolutely haunted him. And going forward, I don't know what comes next for Rubio, but it'll be interesting to see if that continues to sort of be a specter over his future. The second thing is on the question of aspiration. That's not what the electorate wanted. Rubio, I think, was throughout his campaign articulating what we've traditionally called something like the American immigrant experience. People casting everything off and moving and trying to make a better life, and that's always been sort of the archetypal American vision. But that's not where the Republican electorate is. The idea of abandoning a hearth and home and setting out is something he said in his speech last night about America being descended from go-getters and the people who moved into the frontier and tried to make a better life for themselves. That's not what the Republican electorate is feeling like right now. This is a Republican electorate that seems much more inwardly focused, that's hunkering down and putting up the battlements and isn't thinking outwardly, isn't thinking aspirationally in that same way. That's a sea change. It really is a sea change in sort of Republican psychology, and these things ebb and flow, of course. So, in the future, the Republican Party might look much more like the Republican Party or the America that Marco Rubio described last night. It's also the case that the characters of countries and the characters of electorates change. And it may be that the sort of managed decline psychology has taken hold, and that sort of inward focus that Trump has appealed to, and Trump has really sort of stoked, with his build the wall and let's hunker down kind of mentality is going to be effective, is going to be the sort of standard going forward. I don't know. I really don't. I think, Rubio is a good man who has done a great service for the Republican Party and the conservative movement in general, and I hope he continues to be a part of it. It's somewhat, it's radically disappointing that Florida thinks it's a better time for Donald Trump than Marco Rubio, but that's how the voters feel right now.
Well, the word of the night, whether you're Cruz or Trump, was unify. It's time to unify. If you're Ted Cruz, it's everybody except for Trump. Get on my bandwagon here. We're basically at the point where you got to choose somebody else to take on Trump, especially with Rubio out of the race. Yes, Kasich won Ohio, but that's his home state, and where else has he won and can he win? So I'm the only one with the delegate numbers who can even make this a plausible case. Everybody come on board. Trump says, look, I've got this huge lead now. I've won in every different part of the country. Let's come together, or else we're going to be this huge fractured party. But given the fact that Kasich did win Ohio, the odds of a contested convention are still out there. We'll see how the rest of the states play out, but it could happen. And Trump has made it very clear, speaking on CNN this morning, that if he's got a lead, a commanding lead, even if he doesn't have a majority of pledged delegates, he expects to be handed the nomination in Cleveland. And if not, there could be trouble. Here's what he told Chris Cuomo.
I think we'll win before getting to the convention, but I can tell you, if we didn't, and if we're 20 votes short, or if we're 100 short, and we're at 1,100 and somebody else is at 500 or 400, because we're way ahead of everybody, I don't think you can say that we don't get it automatically. I think you'd have riots. Could
have riots in Cleveland. Ian, the RNC quick to say that they're sure that Trump was speaking metaphorically there. But on the one hand, it's a horrific martini because you've got Donald Trump moving the goalposts on what it takes to become the nominee. But secondly, he is right that if he does have a decisive lead and he doesn't get it, there's going to be a disaster in this party going forward, whether he gets it and the rest of the party hates it, or whether he doesn't get it and all of his people revolt.
That's not untrue, but it's not necessarily a reason to hand him the nomination either. The purpose of the nominating convention is to find a nominee that is acceptable to a majority consensus of the Republican delegates. If Trump gets there with 40% of the delegates or 48% or whatever the case may be, and 52% of the delegates are staunchly, unyieldingly, irreconcilably opposed to him, he's not the nominee. That's the way the rules work. And those 52 need to wheel and deal to find another nominee that's acceptable to the majority. That's the way the rules are set up. It's, if the Republican Party wanted to hand the nomination to whoever has a plurality of delegates or whoever has the most coming in, and not a majority, they could have done that, but they didn't, and there's a reason. So, I think that while there will be enormous pressure if Trump does go into the convention with a commanding lead, if he's just, however, maybe 100 delegates off, less than 100 delegates off, that doesn't entitle him to the nomination. Second is, riot comment is so perfectly Trump. It's this sort of nice party you got there. Be a shame if something, happened to it. Kind of moment that he does. This sort of quasi gangsterism that we've seen more and more of over the last couple of weeks. I wish the RNC is really manifesting its Stockholm syndrome by trying to play this down as just colorful language that Donald Trump is using. I think he knows that, as he says, his supporters are very passionate, to explain why they beat up people in the streets. I think he knows that that's a possibility, and he has no scruples about leveraging it as a way to intimidate the party into some sort of ersatz unity in Cleveland. And if that's the case, then the GOP deserves undying shame for not standing up to him, period, not standing up to him earlier. But the purpose of the convention should be to find a nominee who's acceptable to a majority of the delegates. They shouldn't be cowed by Donald Trump's bluster.
Ian, the good news is this is all an academic discussion because former House Speaker John Boehner, who everyone is dying to hear what he thinks of this, says that everyone should just rally around Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, who is, in case anyone's missed it, is not a candidate for president this year, and just put this whole controversy to bed. It'll unite the party. Everything will be great.
Yeah, I'm sure that the Trump voters are eager to fall in line with what John Boehner recommends. I loved Paul Ryan as vice president. I'd love to cast a vote for him in almost any capacity. Someone joked, though, that if for some reason Paul Ryan were somehow to be the nominee, if the delegates could not find an alternative and finally they could only settle on Paul Ryan, then that would be both the House speakership and the Republican nomination. And so it turns out that, Paul Ryan is doing jobs, the jobs that Americans won't do. It's a good line.
Following in the footsteps of James K. Polk, I believe, is the only other House Speaker to ever be president. But guessing that's not going to happen. Just going out on a limb there. Not sure what will happen in Cleveland exactly, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. Ian, we always get you on the most depressing days of this election cycle. I really appreciate you having.
I'll hold it against Jim for the rest of my career.
Talk to you on Monday.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
Ian Tuttle of National Review in for Jim Garrity today. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Jim will be back on Thursday. Please join us then for the next 3 Martini Lunch.